The Spell, Part 1, Chapter 2. The Armstrongs had installed themselves in the Villa Codilambra near Settignano. The date for the wedding was no sooner settled than Jack cabled to secure what had always seemed to him to be the most glorious location around Florence. Years before, his favorite tramp had been out of the ancient city through the Porta alla Croce to La Mensola, whence he delighted to ascend the hill of Settignano. Every villa possessed a peculiar fascination for him. The Poggio Gerardo, the Primo Palagio del Refugio of the Decameron made Boccaccio real to him. The Villa Buonarroti, whither Michelangelo was sent as a baby, after the Italian custom to be nursed in a family of Scarpellini, always attracted him, and at times without number he had stood admiringly before the wall in one of the rooms, gazing at the figure of the satyr, which the infant prodigy drew with a burning stick taken from the fire. In those days he had been seized with a secret yearning to become an artist, and often he had tried to reproduce the satyr from memory, but always the ugly visage assumed a mocking, sneering aspect, which caused him to relinquish his cherished ambition in despair. But the Villa Codilambra appealed to Armstrong for a different reason. It stood high up on the hill, affording a wonderful view of the village of Settignano and the wide-spreading valley of the Arno. The villa itself, with its overhanging eaves, quaint angles, and narrow windows set on heavy consoles, was essentially Tuscan and impressive far out of proportion to its size. It would have seemed to be massive, but for an arcade at either end, the one connecting the house itself with its chapel, the other leading from the first floor through a spiral stairway in one pyre of the arcade to what originally, in the days of the Gambarelli, had been an old fish pond and herb garden. In front of the villa, a row of antiquated stone vases shared the honors with equally dilapidated stone dogs along a grassy terrace held up by a low wall, while beyond this and the house was the vineyard. Armstrong had studied the plans of the house and the grounds from a distance because, after his disappointing experience with Michelangelo's satyr, he had firmly determined to become an architect and to build Italian houses in America. He had walked up and down the long bowling green behind the villa, carefully noting the number of statues set upon the high retaining wall and figuring the height of the edges. One day old Giuseppe, the sun-baked gardener, who had watched the boy first with suspicion and then with interest, invited him to enter, and his joy had been complete. Giuseppe showed him the fish pond and the grotto, lying in the shadow of the ancient cypresses, made up of varicolored shells and stones, with shepherds and nymphs occupying niches around a trickling fountain. He led him to the balustrade at the end of the bowling green and pointed out the panorama which terminated in the hills beyond the southern bank of the river. Parallel with at the back of the villa was another wall which supported a terrace of cypress and ilex trees. Behind this was the Salvatico, without which no self-respecting Italian villa could maintain its dignity, with stone seats beneath the heavy foliage, offering grateful relief from the glare of the sun. And here and there were white statues of classic goddesses to relieve the loneliness had it existed. An iron gate led into the wall opposite the main doorway of the villa, led into a small garden, this leading in turn into another grotto, which, with its fountain and statues, formed an extension of the vista. On either side a balustrated flight of steps led up to an artificial height, the Italians' beloved terrazza, flanked by rows of orange and lemon trees growing luxuriantly in their red earthen pots, while against the wide balustrades rested the heavily scented clusters of the camellia and the rose-tinted oleander. 12 years is a short space of time in Italy, where age is reckoned by the millennial, so it seemed perfectly natural when Armstrong arrived in Florence to find Giuseppe still at his post and included in the lease as a part of the Villa Codilombra. The old man expressed no surprise, no delight, yet at heart he was well pleased. The previous tenants of the villa had been the unimaginative family of a German-American brewer, and their preference for beer over the wonderful Vino Rosso, which he himself had pressed out from the luscious grapes in the vineyard, filled his heart with sorrow. He confided to Annetta, the red-lipped maid Armstrong had engaged for Helen, that he was glad to serve an Americano molto importante rather than a porco. And Giuseppe took great satisfaction in placing upon the last word all the emphasis needed to express 6 months' accumulated disgust. From the moment the Armstrongs arrived, Giuseppe's admiration for Helen knew no bounds. To him she was the personification of all that was perfection. Not that he expressed it even to Annetta. He would have forgotten Mass on Good Friday sooner than so forget his place. It was rather that devotion which is born and not made, occasionally but not often, found in those who enter so intimately into the life of those they serve, yet who must always feel themselves apart from it. Hardly a day had passed since the Armstrongs had assumed possession of the villa that Helen had not found the choicest fragole at her plate. Each juicy berry carefully selected and resting upon a bed of its own leaves at the bottom of the little basket. Her room was ever redolent with the odor of the flowers he smuggled in, always unobserved, and his instructions to the more frivolous Annetta as to her duties toward a nobile donna were such as to cause that young woman to throw her head haughtily on one side, with the observation that she was probably as well acquainted with the requirements of a lady's maid as any gardener was apt to be, even though he were old enough to be her grandfather. This particular tiff had taken place while Armstrong and his wife were making their excursion to Fiesole. On their return, they had found Giuseppe in a morose mood, which quickly vanished where Helen told him, in her broken Italian, that she expected guests upon the morrow, and depended upon him to see that every room was properly decorated, as he alone could do it. The old man could hardly wait to arrange the chairs upon the veranda, so eager was he to seek revenge upon his youthful tormentor. "Did she ask you to arrange the flowers, young peacock feather?" asked Giuseppe of Annetta when he found her in the kitchen. "Did she trust you even to bring the message to old Giuseppe?" "No." With her own lips the excellence appraised that one servant on whom she can rely. "She knows you are good for nothing else," Annetta retorted, with a scornful laugh and a toss of her pretty head, "and she wishes to get you out of the way while we attend to the really important matters. See," she cried as the tinkling of the maid's bell punctuated her remarks, "the nobile donna will now give me commands." Giuseppe could not so far forget his dignity as to reply to such an outrageous slander, so he contented himself with casting upon Annetta his most withering glances as she hastily brushed past him, holding back her skirts, lest they be defiled by touching the old man. He watched her angrily until she vanished through the door, then, with the choicest maledictions at his command, he shuffled into the garden, into his own domain, where the present generation of ill-bred servants, as he explained to himself, could vex him not. Mrs. John Armstrong's first dinner at the villa Caldillombra was an unqualified success. Uncle Peabody had arrived early that morning. His optimism had set its seal of approval upon the evident happiness of the bridal couple, and he had already established himself as chief reflector of the concentrated joy which he saw about him. Ines Thayer was received into Helen's welcoming arms soon after luncheon, and was at once installed in the best guest chamber for an extended visit. Two dusty vettori brought the Sinclair girls, Emory and Eustace, in time for dinner, each driver striving to deliver his passengers first in anticipation of an extra pourboire. The company was therefore complete, and each member quite in the spirit of the occasion. The great candelabra cast their light upon the animated party seated about the table in such a manner that the old paintings hanging upon the walls of the high rooms were but dimly visible. The long windows were open, and the light breeze just cooled the air enough to mellow the temperature, without so much as causing the candle flames to flicker. Giuseppe's choicest flowers, deftly arranged upon the table by Helen's skillful hands, contrasted pleasantly with the antique silver and china which had once been the pride of the original owner of the villa, and the menu itself, wisely entrusted by Helen to the old Italian cook, was ripe with constant surprises for the American palate. Even the wines were new, if not in name, at least in flavor, for Italian vintages leave behind them their native richness and aroma when transplanted. Never was any Vino Rosso so delicious as that which Giuseppe made, even though unappreciated by his former master. Never such La Crema Christi as that which Armstrong secured in a little wine shop near the Bargello. Never such as the Spumante as that which sparkled in the glasses, eager to share its own bubbling happiness in return for the privilege of touching the fair lips of the beautiful Donne Americane. "We had a friend of yours on board ship, Miss Thayer," said Emery, speaking to his left-hand neighbor as they seated themselves. "A friend of mine?" queried Inez. "I can't think who it could be." "Bertie the pastor," replied Emery. Inez cast a quick glance at Helen. "Really?" she asked. "I thought he was going to spend the summer at Bar Harbor." "Changed his mind at the last moment," he said. "Could not resist the charms of Italy. Did you know, Helen?" Emery addressed himself to his hostess. "The pastor has developed a mania for art." Helen laughed. "No," she replied, "that is news indeed. It is a side of Bertie's nature which even his best friends had not suspected. Is he coming to Florence? Can't say, but he is evidently planning to leave Rome. We left him at the Vatican in the Pinacoteca." Standing before Raphael's Transfiguration with the Baedeker in his hand, queried Jack. "No, studying Cook's Continental Timetable." "What a detective you would make, Mr. Emery," suggested Mary Sinclair as the laughter subsided. "I have a better story about the pastor than that." Eustace waited to be urged. "Give it to us, Dick," said Jack helpfully. "It was at Gibraltar," began Eustace. "We were in the same party, going over the fortifications. The pastors, you know, enlisted at the time of the Spanish War. Some family friend in the Senate obtained for him a berth as second lieutenant, and his company got as far as Key West. He rather prides himself on his military knowledge, and he confided to me that he had his uniform with him, in case he was invited to attend any court functions. Well, all the way around, the pastor explained everything to us. The Tommy Atkins, who was our guide, was as serious as a mummy, but confirmed everything Bertie said. When you reached the gallery at the top, you remember, the guide points out the parade ground below, and it happened that there was a battalion going through its evolutions." "Ah," said the pastor, "this is very interesting." Then he described each movement, giving it the technical military name. At last he turned to our guide and said patronizingly, "I'm a bit disappointed, Sergeant. After all I have heard of the precision of the English army, I have often seen American soldiers go through those same movements just as well as that." The sergeant saluted respectfully and gravely. "Quite likely, sir," he said, "quite likely. These are raw recruits, arrived yesterday, sir." "The pastor was a sport, though," added Emery. "When he saw that the joke was on him, he handed Tommy a shining sovereign and said, 'Here, Sergeant, have this on me, and a drink, a health to our two armies. May comparison never be needed.'" Helen clapped her hands. "Good for Ferdy. He is all right if people would only leave him alone. Too bad he has so much money." Eustace was reflective. If the pastor had to get out and hustle a bit, you would find he had a whole lot of stuff in him. "Of course he has," Uncle Peabody agreed. "Do you know Mr. the pastor?" Inez asked, surprised. "No," replied Uncle Peabody. "I don't need to, after hearing Mr. Eustace's summary. On general principles, everyone has a whole lot of stuff in him. The trouble is that people don't give it a chance to come out. Your confidence is evidently based upon your general optimism. Armstrong remembered that Helen had mentioned this as a cardinal characteristic. Yes, but proved by 1,001 experiments. Our present subject, who now becomes number 1002, is apparently handicapped by the misfortune of inherited leisure. It is rarely that a man of position reaches his fullest development without the spur of necessity. More frequently we see one extreme or the other, too much possessions or too much necessity. That is all very well as a theory, but does it really prove anything as regards the Pastor? Questioned Armstrong. Personally, I think optimism is a dangerous thing. This confidence that everything is coming out right is what makes criminals out of bank cashiers. There is a vast difference between real and false optimism, replied Uncle Peabody. I knew a man once who called himself a cheerful pessimist because every time he planted a seed, it grew down instead of up. He came to expect this, so it did not worry him any. He was a real optimist, even though he did not know it. What would be your prescription for a case like Mr. De Peyster's? Queried Bertha Sinclair. A good wife possessed of ambition, sympathy, and tact, Uncle Peabody replied promptly. This, my dear Miss Sinclair, is your opportunity to assist me in proving my argument. Will you be my accomplice? Why, I don't even know Mr. De Peyster, Bertha protested. You must find someone else. Very well, sighed Mr. Cartwright. You see how difficult it is for science to assert its laws. Helen caught sight of Inez's cheeks and hastened to her friend's relief. Uncle Peabody, do you know that you are responsible for the first difference of opinion which has arisen between my husband and me? By gracious, no, can it be possible? It is a fact. I stated to him only yesterday that perfect digestion was the only basis on which health and happiness can possibly rest. You taught me that, but Jack asserts that a touch of indigestion is absolutely essential to genius. How does he know? Has he a touch of indigestion? Not a touch, laughed Armstrong, and that proves my statement. I really believe I might have been a genius if my digestion had not always been so disgustingly strong. Don't despair, my dear boy. Uncle Peabody looked at Jack over his spectacles. Genius is a germ and sometimes develops late in life. If your theory is correct, a few more gastronomic orgies such as this will make you eligible. But is there not something in what I say? Armstrong persisted seriously. Is it not true that good health is against intellectual progression? Is it not good health the supremacy of the physical over the mental? The healthy man is an animal. He eats and sleeps too much. Pain and suffering have not developed the nervous side, which is so closely connected with the intellectual. When the physical side becomes weakened, then the brain begins to act. Uncle Peabody listened attentively and then removed his spectacles. My dear Jack Armstrong, he said at last, I can see some fun ahead for both of us, and Helen has placed me still further in her debt by her choice of a husband. Your argument is not a new one. It was invented a great many years ago in France by some clever person who wished to have an excuse for late nights, absinthe and cigarettes. Do you mean seriously to advance a theory which, if logically carried through to the end, would credit hospitals and homes for the hopelessly depraved with being the highest intellectual establishments in the world? But look at the examples which can be cited, Armstrong continued. Undisturbed, Zola produced nothing of importance after he adopted the simple life, and Swinburne's poetry lost all its fire as soon as he reformed. Can you prove in either case that the question of nutrition or digestion entered into the matter at all? Oh, it may have been a coincidence, of course, but many other cases might be added. Uncle Peabody was silent for a moment. Let me give you a simple problem, he said at length. Helen tells me that you have an automobile now on its way to Florence. Armstrong assented. When it arrives, I presume you will engage a chauffeur. What has an automobile to do with nutrition, Mr. Cartwright? Demanded Mary Sinclair. Surely an automobile has no digestion. My application is near at hand. When you engage that chauffeur, I presume you will insist that he knows the mechanism of the machine, understands the application of the motive power, and other details which enter into safe and successful handling of the car. Naturally, replied Jack, I am not introducing my machine here for the purpose either of murder or suicide. Exactly, that is just what I wanted you to say. Now, every human stomach is an engine which requires at least as intelligent handling as that of an automobile. Upon its successful working depends the mechanical action of the body. We may disregard the additional dependence of the brain. Petroleum in the automobile is replaced by what we call food in the human engine. Too much of either, unintelligently applied, produces the same unfortunate result. Now I ask you, John Armstrong, would you engage as chauffeur for your automobile a man who knew no more about the mechanism of its engine, or how to feed and handle it properly than you yourself know about your own body engine? No, Armstrong admitted, frankly, I would not. But which is more serious, a damage resulting from his ignorance or from your own? Look here, Mr. Cartwright, said Jack laughingly. You promised that there was fun ahead for us both. At present it seems to be mostly for you and your friends. Who started the discussion? Helen, but I admit my error in being drawn into it. I had not expected to be convinced upon my own evidence. Helen rose. I must rescue my husband from the calamity I have brought upon him. Come, let us have our coffee in the garden.